And Trump was saying to Zelensky, this is what it is. This is your deal. And Zelensky came back and said, well, how are you going to feel if we lose? And I think that's what sent Trump off because Zelensky was saying, all right, if we cave in, where does that leave you? You got to face Russia then. How are you going to feel? And that really set Trump off. And he
Those are
said,
the
I'll
magic
tell you how
words.
we're going to feel. We're going to feel fine. It's not
Right.
up to you to tell us how we're going to feel. So Zelensky played a card that he didn't have, and Trump knew he didn't have it, and Trump called his bluff. I think that was the whole meeting, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
And I think Vance was there to ensure whatever continuity Trump could provide. Zelensky was saying, where are we after 4 years? And Trump was trying to say, well, Vance is here. So, if he gets reelected, it's Vance.
And I saw an interview with Rubio, and Rubio said that Zelensky backed out of three deals with the mineral rights. Rubio said it, and Bessent said it, Treasury Secretary. So you had the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury both saying these were backed out of twice, and then he came and they said, "All right, we got an agreement, we got a deal. Okay, we're going to get the press in here. We'll smile, we'll shake hands, then we'll go to lunch, and we'll get everything signed off." And he backed out again, and I think that's what was pissing off. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Markets and Madness, the place where we discuss what happens, the madness that occurs when politics, economics, and personalities all move in different directions. And we've certainly seen politics and personalities move in some crazy directions this, last 24 hours, and it certainly has affected the markets. Morning, Tim. How you doing this morning?
Hey there, Fred. Just trying to digest yesterday's news. This
Yeah.
for anybody watching. We're doing this the day after the explosion between Zelensky and Vance and Trump yesterday at the White House.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sea change in what we have seen in terms of diplomacy in front of the cameras over the last, I can't remember since I was a child how things have developed.
Well, I was thinking about the fact that it was public,
Yeah,
and didn't Trump get impeached for having a private conversation with
right.
none other than Zelensky?
That's right.
So I can't blame him for having the cameras there.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So a lot of things to digest. Speaking to a good friend, somebody I respect, I spent probably 2 hours with him late last evening talking about the situation and how it developed and what went on. And he's someone who has been very pro-U.S., has become very anti-U.S. in our stance
Where's he
in how
located?
right now in Italy, he's Lithuanian, right? So he was
Well,
part of
Lithuania,
yeah,
they're a little concerned, yeah.
yeah, he was part of the old Soviet bloc. He's seen things happen before, doesn't necessarily trust, nor should he, the Russian bear. So, his point was, I can't believe what Trump did. I can't believe what Trump did. I says, you got to understand, Trump was voted in on an America First policy. But the U.S. is tired of war. We're tired of spending money we don't have for a fight we shouldn't have gotten into. And after a while, we agreed to disagree. It is a very, you know, there's a lot to digest. There's a
Well,
lot
I
to
think the
digest.
first thing you have to ask yourself is why is there a war? Why did Putin invade in the first place? If you're in Lithuania, maybe you'd think it's because he wants to reconstitute the old Soviet bloc, and that's possible. But I got to think, after finding the resistance he found in the Ukraine, if that was his motive, he's got to rethink that motive.
Right. Yeah, they're
He's
not
out
going
of
to march
troops.
through Europe. Everybody's talking about him going into Poland and going into,
With what?
yeah,
He's got no troops now.
right,
If oil prices drop, which they will under Trump, he's not going to have the money to
right.
do it either.
Yeah, it was a sad view on geopolitics and how it all broke down. It
Okay,
didn't
so
need to.
the first thing I would ask you is why do you think Putin went in the first place? Do you think it was to establish the old Soviet bloc?
No, absolutely, it was because of the incursion of NATO on his border. And I remember the famous Kamala Harris peacekeeping mission where she went to Europe and implored Ukraine, invited him in. We need you in NATO. We want you in NATO. And I think Putin invaded a week later, less than a week later.
Right,
So
and we told Putin
yeah,
previously that NATO would not expand. So I don't think we have clean hands here. And Zelensky feels that. Zelensky feels betrayed. He gave up his nukes for guarantees that Obama made him.
Mhm.
So that's really why when Vance started talking about diplomacy, he was basically, and he's right, he was right. He was saying, well, diplomacy is bullshit. Look at where it got us now. We're at war now with diplomacy. But I would argue that we're at war because we made guarantees to Putin that we didn't back up.
Yeah, it's there was a couple of points that struck me. One was his insistence on security guarantees, and Trump came back and said, "Sign the deal, sign the mineral deal." And after the whole event, I saw a quick press conference that Lindsey Graham did. Lindsey Graham, the most ardent supporter of the Ukraine and happy to write a check anytime he can to
Wearing
Ukraine.
the colors, wearing the tie with Ukraine colors.
Did he? I didn't notice that. Yeah. He said, Zelensky was way out of line. He said, "You want guarantees?" He said, "Sign a mineral deal, and we've got something to guarantee." We're going to be in there, and we've got an interest, the U.S. interest to protect, a partnership to protect. You can't have a partner if the partner doesn't want to have peace. Yeah, the fact
Yeah,
that he
I
didn't want
think,
to have that Zelensky didn't want to have a ceasefire. You get a ceasefire to bring people to the table, right? That's how it starts. It's a process.
yeah, and Zelensky's reluctant to do that because
Yeah.
Russia will rearm, and that's his position, and it's a valid position. 2 points here. One, if you're looking at a mob movie, and one mobster will say to the other guy, "Go tell him this is what it is." And when they use those terms, "this is what it is," it means there's no more talking. This is it. This is what it is. And Trump was saying to Zelensky, "This is what it is. This is your deal." And
Right.
Zelensky came back and said, "Well, how are you going to feel if we lose?" And I think that's what sent Trump off because Zelensky was saying, "All right, if we cave in, where does that leave you? You got to face Russia then. How are you going to feel?" And that really set Trump off. And he
Goes with
said,
a
"I'll
magic
tell you how
word.
we're going to feel. We're going to feel fine. It's not
Right.
up to you to tell us how we're going to feel." So Zelensky played a card that he didn't have, and Trump knew he didn't have it, and Trump called his bluff. I think that was the whole meeting, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
And I think Vance was there to ensure whatever continuity Trump could provide. Zelensky
Well,
was saying, "Where are we after 4 years?" And Trump was trying to say, "Well, Vance is here. So, if he gets reelected, it's Vance."
and I saw an interview with Rubio, and Rubio said that Zelensky backed out of 3 deals with the mineral rights. Rubio said it, and Bessent said it, Treasury Secretary. So you had the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Treasury both saying these were backed out of twice, and then he came and they said, "All right, we got an agreement, we got a deal. Okay, we're going to get the press in here. We'll smile, we'll shake hands, then we'll go to lunch and we'll get everything signed off." And he backed out again, and I think that's what was pissing off Trump also.
You know, it kind of reminded me of when he met with North Korea the second time. The first time was all goody goody, and you're a great guy, and I'm walking across the line. And then the second time, it was, yeah, I had to walk away from the deal. He was unrealistic, and that's exactly what he did to Zelensky yesterday. He pulled the rug out from Zelensky. So a couple of things. I think either Zelensky is going to put his tail between his legs and come back, because here's what's going to happen. I think Europe is meeting right now, and they're all talking tough. And then one of them is going to look at the other and say, "Okay, write a check for $200 billion." And then they're all going to look at each other and say, "Well, you write the check. The check, well, we'll be there, lad." And they'll argue about that for a little while. Maybe not Britain, but certainly Germany and Macron, France.
Italy, yeah,
Italy's not going to go along with it.
yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. It's just they're not
Right.
they're not
Yeah.
signing on to that.
And they're gonna make overtures to Trump and try to bring us back into that. And Trump's gonna shrug his shoulders and say, "Nah, everything's fine here. You want us to borrow money to give to them, and when they can't account for what we gave them in the first place. And by the way, I want mineral rights for that to secure the loan."
I remember that it was a loan, right? Now they're saying it wasn't a loan. I thought I understood that Biden had said and Pelosi had said, "Don't you worry about this money. This is a loan." And I remember Tim Scott brought it up in one of the debates because he was all in favor of sending money over, and he reiterated this is a loan to the Ukrainians.
Well, I don't know. Trump is saying no. Trump is saying the Europe gave him a loan, but we gave them money. And we can't even tell what they did with the money. I mean, there's all kinds of rumors about the weapons floating around. That's a whole other issue. So I think Europe will make an overture to us and say, come back in. And Trump's going to say, look, I know where Putin is in this. You guys haven't talked to Putin. I know where he is, and I know what's a non-starter, and I know what he needs. So I constructed a deal that I think fits Putin. People are blaming me for being Putin's lapdog, but I know what the guy's going to settle for. So what do you want me to do? I can't trade his book.
The other mob movie famous quote, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer, right?
Yeah.
He knows where he's going.
I didn't see him bring any cannolis to Russia.
That's right.
So Europe is going to come to the U.S. and say, reconsider this. Europe is going to try to negotiate a deal between us and Zelenskyy.
There was a meme that I saw this morning that said Putin was going to negotiate a peace between Trump and Zelensky.
Well, I think Europe's going to do that or try to do it. And then when push comes to shove, Zelensky's going to say, okay, Europe, you guys are with me, right? And Europe's going to hem and haw and say, well, maybe, maybe not. And then either Zelenskyy will lose support. But meanwhile, Russia is going to bomb the shit out of Ukraine.
And they're going to
Thousands
talk
more
about
people are going to
they're going to
die.
talk about impeaching Zelensky. One of the MPs, one of his big dissenters, put out yesterday, we got to start immediate impeachment proceedings against Zelensky.
Well, what's he going to fight a war with? If Europe's not there and the U.S. is not there, he's out of bullets. So I don't see where he had, and Trump was right when he said you have no cards to play. And that's another thing. They probably shouldn't have done it in English. They probably should have done it with translators. That
You
would
know,
that would have helped.
I saw the beginning of the Lex Friedman podcast, probably the first 45 minutes of it, with Zelensky. And the first 15, 20 minutes was Zelensky talking about what language they would do the interview in. He says, because Friedman, you're Ukrainian, you speak Russian, and you speak English. He says, I speak all three, but this is not going to be done in English. This is going to be done in Ukrainian. So he was very adamant about that. So the fact that he came in and spoke English in that press conference, I give him credit for that, because that was a big sticking point for him.
Yeah. Yeah, I give him a lot of. I mean, the guy's in a tough position. I mean, he's fighting a war. He's got no arms, really. He has to rely on other people to supply him arms. He's got no more manpower, and he's facing Russia, for Christ's sakes.
And I think the thing that pissed Zelensky off when Vance basically said you're conscripting soldiers, you're dragging people off the streets and putting them in and taking them to the army. You don't have the army anymore. You know, the army's gone. The average age of the soldiers, I think, is in their 40s in the Ukrainian army. So I think that pissed off Zelensky and got his back up. And that started the whole.
Well, I think it started beforehand. It started when he blew up at the Treasury Secretary, long before that meeting.
Yeah.
And Trump had that at the end of his nose. And that's why he's calling him ungrateful. He's thinking that he had no respect. And then Trump took a shot at him for the way he was dressed. Did you see that?
When he first walked in. Yeah.
I see you dressed up for this.
But he did support him when the question was asked. And I think he's dressed okay. So he came back in front of the crowd. But it's a sad look overall for everybody because it doesn't solve anything.
So how did the markets take it? We rallied, right?
We rallied in a big way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sort of caught me by surprise. As I say, I spoke to the European, my buddy, and he's insistent that U.S. is going to be an outcast with the tariffs coming, with our essential pull out of NATO or not support of the European war effort, that U.S. will be an outcast economically and overall. And listening to that in one ear and watching the market rally in the other ear, I'm scratching my head saying, the defense stocks really didn't take off, where you would have thought that there's going to be some rearmament, there's going to be some buy-in, but I guess it's not going to be done out of our pocket.
Well, RTX is the only one I watch, and that was up on the day and up after the argument, too. I think, first of all, what Trump told the markets was, I'm not going to borrow to give money to the Ukraine. So that's another $200 billion or $250 billion that you don't have to worry about me financing in debt. And, I got Musk taking money off. I got this gold card. I got tariffs. I think the market was less concerned about tariffs than they were us getting more involved with Ukraine. And the ultimate was Trump was saying, I'm not putting troops on the ground over there. And I'm not getting us tied up where we have a commitment for troops on the ground. That's just not happening. The only way I'll go in is if we go in and we mine for minerals and we get something out of it and we give Ukraine money for rebuilding so Ukraine can spend to rebuild Ukraine, and we'll take advantage of that. We'll rebuild Ukraine for a price, and Ukraine will have the money for the mining efforts.
There's a few non-starters on both sides. Putin says you can't join NATO. Zelensky says I need security guarantees. Zelensky also said I want the Donbass region back. I want my people back. And Putin is, these people want to be Russians, right? These people don't want to be Ukrainians. These people are Russians to begin with. They've been Russians long before. Yeah.
I think I'm back.
Yeah. So Zelensky wants the Donbass region back, and so you got two intractables there. So I don't know how that gets resolved.
Gets resolved without Zelensky. I think that's the only place they're going to go. I may be moving the clock forward 3 or 4 months, but once Europe comes to grips with the fact that they're dealing with Russia without the U.S., we'll see they're going to fracture. They're not one voice. So the only solution is no Zelensky, unless Zelensky caves.
Yeah, Putin's not going to cave.
No,
No,
especially after yesterday.
right, right. And where does China fit in this whole picture?
Well, if we can do a deal that suits Putin, China loses some cards, but they've been having live fire drills in Taiwan.
Okay, I didn't know
So,
that.
so you really are on the verge of World War III.
Yeah,
And Trump is aware of that. And Zelensky doesn't give a shit.
as far as he's
As
concerned,
far as he's
in
concerned,
World
he's
War
in it now.
II. Yeah, they're in my homeland.
Europe should care, and Taiwan should care, and the Philippines.
Yeah, it was a wild ride, and I did watch the whole 50 minutes from the beginning to the end. Originally, they put out some little snippets, some little 5-minute snippets, 7-minute snippets, but watching the whole piece, you get a different perspective of actually what was said and where everybody came from.
Well, I give Trump credit for transparency because at least we know what's happening. Under the previous administration, you'd hear, well, we had frank discussions. They were frank and positive and constructive. Yeah, no, that wasn't. It was frank, but it wasn't constructive. Maybe it was in the long run. I don't know.
There was also some stuff I saw on social media this morning that, and I don't know how true this is, I'm just repeating, that Zelensky was late because he met with a couple of the war hawks from the previous administration and some senators. And they told him, hang tough, he's going to cave, hang tough, he's going to cave. I don't know how true that is, but being late to show up for Trump, that doesn't start well.
No, being late, dressed the way he was dressed, and coming after he blew up at Bissett.
Vance.
Was
Vance and Bissett.
yeah. I think Zelensky he's fighting a war, so I got to give him that. And he's hung on to an impossible situation. I got to give him that. But you don't bite the hand that feeds you, number one. And number two, especially if that hand is Donald Trump.
And he brought up, Trump said we gave a lot more than Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And Zelensky said, no. And he said, yeah, we did. No, we didn't. Yeah, we did. So I don't know who's right. I don't know what the real numbers are.
Well, that was the scene. That was the scene in with Pesci saying, well, you're a little out of line. No, I wasn't out of line. Yeah, you were a little out of line. I think you're a little out of line now. The shoebox scene.
There was another meme that I saw on social media as Zelensky's getting in the car outside of the White House. Go get your shine box.
Yeah.
It's funny, but it's sad. It's funny.
Yeah, it is really. I think the sad part about it breaks my heart is a lot of people are going to die in the Ukraine as a result of this.
Yeah. And, that's Trump ran on solving this problem and fixing this.
It was an interesting solution.
Yeah.
Very interesting solution. I got to hand it to him. I mean, he when you don't have a lot of cards to play, you got to play the hand you dealt. And given the hand he was dealt, he came up with something that puts us there, puts European troops on the ground, generates revenue, for rebuilding Ukraine. On the one hand, does a strategic partnership. Now these guys got to be strategic partners. I don't see that happening unless Zelensky makes a serious U-turn. It ain't happening.
And just getting back to the markets, we did have a big rally after that, but I'm getting pretty negative on the markets. We've talked about it a couple of times where I actually bought some puts earlier in the day yesterday, basically some 2-month low delta puts, just as some sort of protection. I think the numbers are going to get worse. I'm seeing some charts where housing delinquencies are way up. I think we have some really tough sledding ahead for the next few
Yeah,
months.
let's look at that. The consumer has been making ugly noises. We're facing broad layoffs in the public sector. Housing, I'll tell you a story. I worked with this guy at Eurobrokers, and he was just buying a house. And he said to me, well, we're stretching it, but I think I can afford it. I said, have you thought about a ladder? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, let me tell you what your toolbox looks like. Right now, you got a hammer and a screwdriver, maybe a Phillips head, and you got a pair of pliers and a lot of nuts and bolts. That's what your toolbox looks like. When you have your own house, the first thing you're going to need is a ladder. So you're going to go, there was no Home Depot at the time, so you're going to go to Ace Hardware, you're going to buy a ladder. And then somebody's going to say, you know, your lawn is brown, and you're going to have to go buy a hose. And all of these things, then you're going to have to, your wife is going to say, you know what, this room is empty. We need furniture in this room. And that's what's going to break you back, all of these extraneous expenses. And Lacey Hunt once said to me, real estate drives the whole economy. Because you buy the house, then you got to put stuff in it, and you got a driveway, and maybe your car's not going up to speed, and all of a sudden, all your expenditures revolve around this house. It's not just the mortgage. The mortgage is really working in your favor because it's a forced savings. You got a liability paid off an asset, but it's everything else, and everything else is what's going to slow down this economy. Somebody said to me yesterday, "You think Home Depot is going to be under pressure?" I said, no, actually, Home Depot benefits from this because instead of moving, he starts renovating their house or doing what they can. They'll do their own paint job, you know.
That was big during COVID. Yeah, it was.
So anyway, that said, yeah, this market is in for some tough sledding, and which is we've said all along.
Right.
This only exacerbates it, I think.
And how does this all reflect on the dollar?
Well, that's the big question. Dollar feels like it's topping off to me. It feels it's trading like it's under pressure.
It hasn't been able to break through, par in the euro. Dollar yen is, I mean, still 149, 150, still way up.
Well, as long as you got a carry trade, you can't look at yen and measure the strength of the dollar, I think. And somebody said to me, well, gold rallied. Gold has been strong. Of course, that's not true over the last week or two.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, well, the dollar against gold is probably the truest measure because when you're measuring the dollar against other currencies, if the dollar strengthens, it just means they're inflating less than we are. So that's what you call dollar strength. I call dollar strength a weaker gold. So yeah, the dollar did strengthen against gold. And gold feels like technically could drop down to maybe 24, 2500. I sold my GLD yesterday, as a matter of fact.
Did you?
Yeah, I'm lightening up on a lot of stuff. There's some stuff
Yeah, to me, that's
I'm
a core
holding.
position.
I'm holding, and I think I'm going to suffer, but I chose to hold it. All of the quantum computers, I'm staying with that. And that oil trade, it's just starting to work with respect to owning the drillers and owning the shippers and shorting crude oil and natural gas. So I'm leaving those positions on. I lightened up on everything else, you know.
I just bought some puts.
I got out of Google, but I've kept the calls that I own. So I sold some Google, Palatine, Palantir rather. Probably stick with that because it's also its earnings are knocking them out of the ballpark. What you have is a rotation here.
Nvidia the other day had huge earnings and the stock didn't perform well.
Yeah, they're going from
Beat
value. They're going from growth to value.
Yeah.
Inside the sectors.
Yeah. All right. I think we touched on everything. We'll see the way this all plays out with Europe. over the next week. It should be very interesting.
Yeah, I think Europe is going to have their own come to Jesus moment within the European community, and they're going to find out that they're not all speaking with one voice, and not everybody's ready to write a check or send troops. And the first thing they're going to do is try to get Zelensky and Trump back together.
Yeah, that was a point I made to my buddy last night. I said the U.S. is war weary, and we don't have any troops on the ground. Just writing checks has made the country war weary. I think 3 years ago when this all started, everybody was behind Ukraine. Now I think it's fractured. I think if people had had enough.
But to that point, as we're looking at the fraud, waste, and abuse that's being uncovered, we don't want to see another $200 billion go out the door because we're just not sure it's legitimate. The public is now tuned into that. They weren't before. That's one thing I credit Musk for. And the other thing I think that's different this time is that we have a different media. Trump 1.0 had a Twitter that was against him. They blocked him, had a mainstream media that was popular and against him, had administration that controlled the media. Okay, you can only ask these questions, and I'm going to you first, and I'm going to you first. And they really controlled the message. The message now is wide open. You've got X, not Twitter. So rather than Twitter being against him, Twitter's for him. You've got the mainstream media that's pulling their horns in, has been thrown out of the press room in the White House. You got new media taking over. You got Fox all-time highs in the ratings. This is a whole different perspective. And what they're seeing is they're getting content from the White House. Never had that before.
Directly, yeah.
Yeah, you never had that before. Yeah, bring in the cameras. Yeah, I'll have a press meeting. I'll answer your questions. Yeah, this is the cabinet. We're having a cabinet meeting. Marco, you want to talk to this deal? I mean, we've never seen this before. So the U.S. electorate is now the curtains have opened, and this is a really interesting time.
Another point I made to my buddy yesterday, he said, this is not about Trump. He keeps saying me, you got to thank me, you got to thank me. I said, you got to look at where Trump is coming from. I says, and it may be blind. He may be way out in left field, but he really feels that the election was stolen from him. And if he was in power in 2020, this wouldn't have happened. So now he's got to clean up somebody's mess that stole from him and that persecuted him for 4 years. And he's got to solve the problem. He's got to clean up the mess. I said, so that's really at the end of his nose as well.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
Yeah. Well, all right. Listen, it's been a good talk. If you're still listening, everyone, please subscribe, ring the bell, get some new content. Let us know what you think, positive, negative. You may think we're way off base. Love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, guys.
Thanks.